In the gilded drawing rooms of Queen Victoria's court, where duty reigned supreme and emotion was to be subdued, even a princess could find herself ensnared in matters of the heart. Behind the stiff silk crinolines and meticulously arranged portraits, whispered affections and forbidden attachments bloomed like delicate roses in a frost-bound garden. Today, on Regal Chronicles, we unravel one such story, a quiet, courtly love triangle involving Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, Prince Louis of Hesse, and a handsome, captivating courtier named Lord Charles Phipps. A story not of scandalous liaisons or public disgrace, but of private yearning, maternal interference, and the eternal conflict between heart and crown. In the grand and carefully ordered world of Queen Victoria's court, every child was born with a purpose, a path charted long before they ever took their first breath. And for Princess Alice Maud Mary, born on a winter's day in 1843, that path was no exception. She was the third child and second daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and from her earliest days, it was clear that Alice was unlike her siblings. While her elder sister Victoria, known as Vicky, sparkled with brilliance and ambition, and her younger brothers clamoured for attention, Alice was marked by an uncommon tenderness. The royal governesses noted her gentle disposition, her introspective nature, and her extraordinary compassion for those around her, qualities both admired and quietly viewed as liabilities within the steely, duty-bound walls of the royal household. Alice's closest companion and spiritual anchor was her father, Prince Albert. The prince consort, a man of formidable intellect and boundless devotion to moral rigour, nurtured in Alice a love for literature, theology, and inquiry. He encouraged her mind, admiring her sensitivity as a strength rather than a flaw. In letters exchanged between father and daughter, one finds traces of a bond profound in its tenderness. When Alice was only 9 years old, Prince Albert wrote, "Your kind heart and sweet nature, dear Alice, will serve you better than any crown ever could." This paternal affection offered a rare refuge in a court otherwise dominated by Queen Victoria's stern sense of duty. The Queen, though loving, was a woman weighed down by the heavy mantle of monarchy. She demanded absolute obedience, and her children were expected to serve the crown as dutiful extensions of herself. From a young age, Alice was schooled in the arts of submission and propriety. She was to hold her head high, speak only when spoken to, and carry herself with the gravitas befitting a princess. Yet beneath this polished exterior, Alice's heart often rebelled. Unlike her siblings, who seemed better suited to their roles, Alice felt the constraints of royal life acutely. She once confided in a governess, "Sometimes I wish I could be a simple girl in a cottage, where no one expects so much of me." The confines of court protocol felt suffocating. Even the simplest pleasures, a walk in the gardens unchaperoned, a private letter unsupervised, were denied to her. The royal children lived under a regime of relentless supervision, their daily routines charted down to the hour. Yet it was within these restrictions that Alice's extraordinary empathy blossomed. She devoted herself to charitable works even as a teenager, visiting the sick in local villages and tending to injured soldiers during the Crimean War. In a world where compassion was often regarded as weakness, Alice's was a quiet defiance. Her letters from these years are remarkable for their introspection and depth. In one, she wrote to her older sister Vicky, "I see the suffering of others, and I cannot look away. Mamma says I am too tender-hearted, but I cannot bear to see misery and remain still." Such sentiments both endeared her to those around her and unsettled Queen Victoria, who feared that excessive feeling might lead her daughter astray from her royal duties. By the time Alice reached her late teens, she had become known at court as the sensitive princess, a young woman of intelligence, compassion, and quietly turbulent emotions. It was perhaps inevitable that such a heart, seeking solace in a world of rigid duty, would one day find itself drawn to someone unexpected. In the strict hierarchy of Queen Victoria's court, where every glance and gesture carried significance, one station was both shield and prison. And yet, it was often those who moved quietly within the inner sanctum of monarchy, the secretaries, equerries, and confidants, who held the power to shape the most personal affairs of the sovereign and her family. Among these shadowy yet indispensable figures was Lord Charles Edward Phipps. Born in 1801 into a well-connected aristocratic family, Charles Phipps was the epitome of a Victorian gentleman, discreet, loyal, and endlessly capable. By the time Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, Phipps was already a trusted presence within royal circles. His rise was swift. In 1847, he was appointed Keeper of the Privy Purse, a position that made him one of the Queen's most indispensable advisers, managing the royal household's finances and, by extension, wielding quiet influence over court life. But beyond ledgers and state papers, Lord Phipps was a man of considerable personal charm. Those who met him described a man of dry wit, gentle humour, and a rare talent for navigating the treacherous waters of royal etiquette. It was said that he could ease a tense room with a well-chosen word, or bring comfort to a grieving sovereign with a quiet, knowing glance. It was within this rarefied, emotionally stifling atmosphere that Phipps first drew the attention of the young Princess Alice. To a sensitive, contemplative girl, often dismissed as too tender-hearted by her mother and too reserved by her peers, Lord Phipps represented something unfamiliar, a figure of warmth, civility, and understanding. While there exists no dramatic record of how their friendship began, contemporary memoirs and royal diaries hint at the deep impression Phipps made upon Alice. In a court where conversations were measured and displays of genuine sentiment carefully rationed, his easy manner and perceptive eye must have seemed a breath of fresh air. He spoke to Alice not as a prince or political prospect, but as an equal, treating her insights, her questions about philosophy and literature, with sincere interest. It was a quiet but potent form of flattery for a princess often overlooked. Governesses and ladies-in-waiting would later recall how Alice's expression brightened in Lord Phipps' presence, how their conversations lingered longer than decorum strictly allowed, and how the princess, in the anxious days following Prince Albert's frequent illnesses, would often seek Phipps' counsel. It is crucial to understand the nature of affection within the Victorian court. Open flirtation was scandalous, but emotional intimacy, those rare, meaningful exchanges of thought and feeling, could be every bit as intoxicating as any clandestine embrace. Alice's letters from this period, while careful not to name him directly, are tinged with a restless yearning. In one such letter to her elder sister Vicky, she wrote, "There is one, dear sister, who speaks to me as though I were truly understood, whose kindness I shall not soon forget. Who else could this be but the ever-present, ever-perceptive Lord Charles Phipps?" Of course, neither party stepped beyond the bounds of propriety. Victorian society was ruthless to those who transgressed its codes, and both Phipps and Alice were keenly aware of the cost of indiscretion. Yet, within the constraints of duty and decorum, a subtle bond was formed, one made of unspoken admiration, private glances, and conversations charged with meaning. Some might dismiss this as nothing more than courtly kindness. Others, perhaps more attuned to the language of repressed hearts, might recognize it for what it truly was, a connection too fragile to survive in the daylight of royal obligation. And while Queen Victoria remained, for a time, oblivious to the quiet fondness growing in her daughter's heart, it was only a matter of time before the ever-watchful monarch would intervene. For in the world of Windsor and Osborne House, no feeling, no affection, however innocent, escaped the gaze of the Queen. In Queen Victoria's court, privacy was an illusion. Every letter passed through watchful hands. Every word spoken in corridors could find its way to the sovereign's ear. The royal family lived beneath a glass dome, and no sentiment, no glance, went unnoticed for long. Princess Alice, for all her sensitivity and discretion, was no exception. It began with murmured observations, the princess's uncharacteristic laughter in Lord Phipp's company, the way her eyes lingered upon his face, the ease with which they conversed when others faltered under the rigid decorum of court life. Lady-in-waiting records noted Alice's frequent requests for Phipp's company on matters concerning her father's health or charitable works. Such seemingly innocent interactions began to draw quiet notice. The Victorian court was a world where alliances were forged not in declarations, but in glances and gestures. Whispers gathered like storm clouds behind heavy damask curtains. Even the most subtle affections, when observed too often, became fodder for speculation. Queen Victoria, though consumed by the cares of empire and the ailing prince consort, was nothing if not vigilant. She ruled her household with the same relentless authority she brought to her ministers. And though she cherished her second daughter, the Queen had little patience for sentimental folly. One cannot be certain when the Queen's suspicions first took root, but by late 1860, her correspondence reveals a growing concern over Alice's emotional state. In a letter to Vicky, the Queen confided, "Alice is too much inclined to melancholy and attaches herself too warmly to those beneath her station. She must be guided firmly, or she will ruin herself with fancies." Such words speak volumes of Victoria's worldview. To her, affection ungoverned by duty was a dangerous indulgence, especially for a princess whose future was to be brokered like a diplomatic treaty. And so the quiet surveillance began. Alice's visits were curtailed, her correspondence more carefully monitored. Lady Canning, one of Victoria's most trusted ladies-in-waiting, was instructed to gently steer the princess away from over-familiarity with courtiers, reminding her of her high calling. Alice, perceptive as she was, could not have failed to sense the shift. The glances exchanged in drawing rooms were no longer warm but watchful. Conversations ended when she entered a room. The once comforting walls of Windsor and Osborne House began to feel like gilded cages. Even Lord Phipps, wise to the nuances of court intrigue, began to withdraw. His duties called him increasingly into the Queen's confidence, and though his manner remained impeccably correct, the informal warmth between him and the princess cooled under the relentless scrutiny. For Alice, this was a cruel blow. Her father, Prince Albert, whose counsel had been her greatest refuge, was by now ailing, his health eroding under the weight of ceaseless duty. The Queen, ever more anxious and irritable, leaned heavily on Albert while emotionally neglecting their children. In the absence of the two figures she trusted most, Alice found herself isolated. It was during these months of loneliness that the Queen proposed an idea that would change Alice's life forever: a dynastic marriage to one of Europe's minor princes. It was a political arrangement, of course, designed to strengthen ties between Britain and the German duchies. The intended groom was Prince Louis of Hesse, a young man of noble blood but modest fortune. To Queen Victoria, Louis was a perfect match, respectable, pious, and politically advantageous. To Alice, however, he was a stranger, and as her mother's determination hardened into decree, the princess found herself faced with an impossible choice: submit to the cold, calculated demands of duty, or risk defying a sovereign who brooked no rebellion. The love that might have blossomed in tender glances and whispered confidences with Lord Charles Phipps was quietly suffocated by courtly vigilance. In its place, an arranged future loomed, and the Princess of England prepared to be sent into exile, a bride in a foreign land. But hearts such as Alice's are not so easily silenced. And as we shall soon see, not all affairs of the heart end with farewell. To the public, royal marriages were glittering affairs of carriages, jewels, and orchestrated joy. But within the palaces of Europe's crowned heads, marriage was a matter of strategy, not sentiment. Love was a luxury, and often a danger. For Princess Alice, her mother's chosen match arrived in the form of Prince Louis of Hesse, a young officer from a modest German duchy, more known for his lineage than his fortune. Louis was, by all accounts, a kind and good-hearted man. Contemporary accounts describe him as gentle-natured, somewhat shy, and unfailingly dutiful. He lacked the commanding presence of Britain's royal princes or the brilliant wit of the great European statesmen, but he was steady and, crucially, amenable to Queen Victoria's authority. In 1861, amidst a court still shadowed by Prince Albert's declining health, Louis arrived in England. The betrothal was arranged swiftly, with Queen Victoria declaring her approval in no uncertain terms. To Alice, the news was received with a mixture of resignation and heartbreak. Her letters, carefully phrased yet heavy with unspoken sorrow, reveal the quiet turmoil of a young woman forced to abandon both her private desires and the fragile solace of a cherished friendship. I am to be content, though my heart knows little peace. One must learn to be dutiful, even when the soul protests. It is impossible to say whether Lord Charles Phipps spoke to Alice in those final days before her engagement was announced. No letter survives, no memoir dares speak too plainly. Yet there are hints, scattered remarks in court diaries, a note in a lady-in-waiting's recollections that suggest a final, restrained farewell. One such passage, recorded by Lady Augusta Bruce, reads, "It was remarked that on the eve of the princess's announcement, she was seen in quiet conversation with Lord P., her expression marked by a gravity most touching to behold." Whether words of parting were exchanged, or merely a silent acknowledgement of a bond now severed by duty, we shall never know. The engagement proceeded with royal efficiency. Court painters were commissioned, wedding trousseaux assembled, and a date fixed. Yet, behind the scenes, the mood was sombre. Prince Albert's health had worsened, and by December of 1861, just months before Alice's wedding, the prince consort was dead. The grief-stricken Queen Victoria sank into mourning, retreating from public life and tightening her control over her children. Alice, who had been her father's devoted nurse in his final weeks, now faced her future with the double burden of personal loss and royal expectation. In the months that followed, preparations for the wedding continued, though it was marked by an air of subdued mourning. There would be no grand state celebration, no glittering festivities. The ceremony was held at Osborne House, the Queen's private residence on the Isle of Wight, attended by only a handful of guests. On July 1st, 1862, Princess Alice became Princess Louis of Hesse, and by Rhine, her wedding gown a sombre compromise between bridal white and the deeper hues of mourning. And Lord Charles Phipps? He was there, of course, standing among the Queen's officials, his expression recorded by none, his thoughts his own. By then, their bond had been reduced to the echoes of half-forgotten conversations and the tender ache of what might have been. Shortly after, Alice departed England, not just to a new life as the consort of a minor German prince, but to a future of personal trials, family tragedies, and the relentless demands of royal duty far from the land of her birth. As her ship left the English shore, it carried with it the last fragile remnants of a tender affection, one born in quiet conversations and unspoken understanding, stifled by the weight of crown and custom. Alice's new life in Hesse awaited her. But though she would become a devoted wife, mother, and philanthropist, a certain wistfulness remained, a memory of the courtier who, for a fleeting moment, had made a princess feel seen. In the ancient cities of Hesse, where forests pressed close against the cobblestone streets and church bells tolled through the mist, Princess Alice made her new life. She was no ordinary foreign bride. The daughter of Queen Victoria carried with her the stature of the British monarchy and the suffocating expectations that came with it. But beyond the titles and ceremonies, Alice sought meaning in work, in charity, in the solace of duty. Unlike so many of her royal contemporaries, Alice was possessed of a natural empathy. In the aftermath of the Austro-Prussian War, she nursed the injured, visited the poor, and oversaw the foundation of hospitals, acts of quiet defiance against a life intended to confine her to salons and drawing rooms. In the dimly lit rooms of her modest German court, the laughter of children offered a balm against her loneliness. She bore 7 children, among them Princess Victoria of Hesse and the ill-fated Princess Alex, who would one day marry Russia's doomed Tsar Nicholas II. But amid the joys of motherhood, sorrow seemed never far behind. Her letters from Hesse, though carefully phrased for royal archives, betray a longing for the home she left behind. The stately cadence of English summers, the scent of Windsor's rose gardens, the steady presence of a courtier whose name was now absent from her correspondence. Yet, as with so many royal romances, what could not be spoken lingered in absence. I find myself oft adrift in memory, recalling the calm of the river and those steady voices which now are stilled by distance. Such lines, penned under the guise of homesickness, spoke to more than mere nostalgia. In her German exile, Alice carried the ghost of her former self, the bright, earnest princess who once confided in Lord Charles Phipps amidst the suffocating formality of Windsor. Life in Hesse, however, was neither tranquil nor kind. In 1873, Alice's beloved son, Prince Friedrich, affectionately called Fritti, fell from a window. Born a haemophiliac, the boy's injuries proved fatal. Alice was inconsolable, and those close to her remarked that a light within her seemed to dim forever. Letters from the period reflect a woman broken by grief, yet compelled to carry on, her words stripped of earlier warmth. She wrote to her mother of the unbearable silence left by her child's absence, but Queen Victoria, ever bound by her own grief, offered little comfort. And then, in December of 1878, death came for Alice herself. An epidemic of diphtheria swept through the Hessian court. One by one, her children sickened, and though she nursed them tirelessly, fate showed no mercy. On December 14th, the anniversary of her father Prince Albert's death, Alice succumbed to the illness, having kissed her surviving son in an unguarded moment of tenderness. She was 35 years old. Her passing was mourned across Europe, though overshadowed by the grander tragedies of history. Queen Victoria, despite their complicated bond, was devastated. Yet the courtier who had once lingered by Alice's side, Lord Charles Phipps, did not live to mourn her. He had died years earlier in 1866, but perhaps in those final hours, as fever blurred the edges of consciousness and memory folded upon itself, the princess remembered England. The green lawns of Osborne, the sound of the Thames lapping against the banks, and a figure in a dark coat offering quiet counsel beneath the ancient oaks. Theirs had been a love story of silences, of what was left unsaid, of hearts restrained by the tyranny of duty. And though no monument records their bond, it endures in the shadows of history, in the letters half-burned and glances half-recorded. The possible love between Princess Alice of the United Kingdom and Lord Charles Phipps was never recorded in proclamations or painted on canvas. It survives, if at all, in scattered court diaries, in the hesitance of a phrase, in the ambiguity of a letter left unsigned. Their story, if it was one, belonged to a world where duty was absolute and royal women were pawns on a chessboard of alliances. To be a princess was to serve the crown, not the heart. Love, when it came, was meant to be sanctioned, useful, and contained. Even now, historians debate the nature of Alice's relationship with Phipps. Was it a tender friendship forged in the isolation of court life? A mentor's affection for a bright, thoughtful young princess? Or did it, for a time, become something more? An impossible, unspoken bond doomed by the immutable walls of rank and custom? We cannot know. The evidence is scant, the clues maddeningly incomplete. But perhaps it is in that very uncertainty that the story finds its power.